Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Louise. I was waiting to see who was going to say it first.
Me too. Now that we've done our little reels with like, hi, it's kind of
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Good
We'll have to do
morning.
more of
Good
those at some
afternoon.
point.
Yeah.
Well, it's exciting. We're starting a new book. Mentioned it last episode, American Baby by Gabrielle Glaser, A Mother, a Child, and the Secret History of Adoption. So this book dives into the
Yeah.
baby scoop era and all the secrecy and lies and, really exposed it. This only came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah. It's nice to read actually from her because she's such a good writer and it's very rich, like from a reporter type of the way she writes, just the investigative part already mixed with good writing. I can't wait.
Well, and she started because
Mhm.
she was doing a story on
Kidneys, something, right?
right, on dialysis, and she met David Rosenberg in 2007, who was going through dialysis in Portland.
Yeah. And he had such a great sense of humor. So she goes to meet him to talk about his dialysis, story about all of that. And he gets into his background, who he is. And that's when she
Or
gets
not knowing who
not
he
knowing
is.
who he is.
Yeah.
And being very frank about it, being from Jewish heritage and all sorts of interesting things. And so when they start to dig into it, she's like, wait a second here, this is a thing. And I just like that somebody not adopted thought, let me look into this. This is big, and go down the story, stayed in touch with him and how it unfolds. It's I don't know. I just thought their relationship
Well, one
was
thing that
neat.
kind of struck me was, okay, so this book was, well, that was 2007 when she met him, but this book was 2021, and she was writing all this as if it was revelatory,
Yeah.
even though we all know and have,
Yeah.
it's just, it's amazing how that propaganda narrative of how wonderful it all is so outshines and has outshone
Yeah.
any of the negative stuff
She had no idea.
and continues to. Yeah.
Yeah. And she had no idea. And being someone who's out there in the world and writes for things, and she didn't know. And she's in that, right? Like you said, just a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is eye opening. Well, there was some things that that struck out for me where she gets into the relationship of looking back in his family. Do you want to start there with his?
Yeah. Well, it's just that I
Mhm.
highlighted something.
Yep.
And it's just only adoptees would notice this. That, David was wanting to find out where he came from, especially with dialysis and all that. But it says both had, and he's talking about his adoptive parents, both had died long ago, and David didn't feel he was betraying their love by trying to discover more about his identity, medical history, and the woman who, as he put it, gave him up.
He had to wait.
Why is it considered a betrayal of love to want to know who you are and where you came from and your medical history and who you look like?
Yeah. I read that too, and it made me think of me. I was like, oh, yeah. You have permission now to find out who you are.
It's such a,
and he was entrenched in that. I mean, because oh man. Yeah, well, it starts with shame, right? It starts with shame because it gets into the early life of David's grandmother and mother. And
wait, there was one more thing.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Just because, Gabrielle's doing all this newly discovered stuff for her. The adoption business comprised an array of individuals and institutions, from researchers whose pseudoscience justified the advantages of unproven practices in child assessment, to the social workers addressing family crises and adoption agencies that frequently benefited economically and professionally from each woman they persuaded to relinquish a child.
That's exactly right. I was thinking of that recently. I was telling somebody was asking me about my adoption story, and I hear it differently now because I know my mom relinquished me, but to what pressure? Because she was meeting with people at the hospital all the time and social workers. And I'm like, oh, the pressure. Oh, this would be better. There's money involved. It's a business.
I was forcefully taken from my birth mother. I think her mother was in cahoots with like told the nurses and doctors, do not let her hold the baby, take the baby immediately away.
Think of that. We were just talking about the traumas that live with us before we got on. The deep illnesses and different things, anxieties and things that adoptees all seem to have. And think of that you're just taken right there from just crying little baby. It makes me think, yeah. Well, speaking of family matters, so chapter 1, she gets into her grandmother and grandfather's history, and her mother
into
Margaret.
David's.
Yes, sorry. Into David's family. And it's just, it was interesting because the grandmother came over from Germany and they had some wealth and whatever, and then ended up in a string of bad relationships. I don't know if we need to go into all of that, but the way she raised her daughter, Margaret, who's his birth mother, was all about being this good, Orthodox Jewish girl, and yet don't have any desires for men, don't have any, it's shame was
right. And she was
yes.
David's grandmother, Gertrude, was left by her first husband after the crash of 1929.
Yeah, when
so she had a lot of bitterness in her. Yeah. Well, and they came over escaping the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Both of his grandparents.
And she was quite, Gertrude, the grandmother, was quite beautiful and like a model of some sort for hats. Do you remember? I thought that was, in that era, she was quite sophisticated, and then became this hardcore woman that ran her household. The husband had no chance, they said, around her. She ran a tight ship and harsh, right? And really hard on Margaret. And here's this girl coming up in 1950s America trying to become who she is in the country where she's being told these mixed messages, and very naive. It struck me how naive she was about sex and, girl things and, getting her
period. When she got her period, she had to talk to her friend. I think that was super common.
Yeah, I do too.
In families, that stuff just wasn't talked about.
And I thought it was interesting. Did this part strike you as she didn't know how people got pregnant, really? She wasn't totally sure how people got pregnant, but knew that had to do with sex, but she was making out with her boyfriend, all those things, but wasn't really sure how that would occur. That's how, imagine that's how you're ending up having a baby in the world. It's a lot of shame there. You're just this, bad girls do that, good girls don't. That was the message.
Yeah.
And,
that was the era.
That was the era. And she meets a good looking boy in school, George, right? And the mother did not like him.
Well, and his family did not like Margaret because they didn't think that she was good enough. She didn't have the social standing. That
great picture of them, by the way.
Yeah. Beautiful couple.
I know. And it just breaks my heart because I think about what we were just talking about. They end up having their relationship progresses. They sneak out. They finally end up having sex, which she didn't even know that they were having, because they didn't even take their clothes off. I was confused about how all that happened. And then she ends up pregnant. That's where we left off. But just her, the last line of that was what hit me, just the shame involved in it. Because it doesn't change. This is what we're still dealing with. It's like, she knew from her mother's and the synagogue's dictates that sex before marriage was off limits, something only bad girls did. Now she was one of them. And it's like, that just sets up how this man, David's going to be brought into this world. And it just, the backstories. I think that's what we were talking about, the Hallmark moments with adoptees. That's what bugs me, because even just the other day, I was watching something just now. This is 2023. And there was something, there's only the good reunion, certain stories. There's not the backstories of adoptees or the birth mother. It's just painted.
Well, and that jumps me back to the prologue for something I highlighted. the one thing that few, it seemed, thought to consider was the lifelong emotional impact on women who were hidden away in shame during pregnancy, expected to lie about it ever after, and then told to put their babies out of their minds. Few invested much thought in the feelings of the adoptees who were brought up to think that their birth parents hadn't wanted them, and that regardless of how cherished they were their adoptive parents' second choice to biological offspring. Adopted, and then they, for the better, adoptees would blend seamlessly into their new families, the theory went. And if they wanted to know about their biological origins, one day they could look when they were adults. Although with families who had wanted and loved them so much, why would they bother?
Why would they bother?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place that's actually, I just think I'm excited to read it because so many people have actually mentioned it.
Well, yeah, when there's a list of like, if you want to understand adoptees and adoption, here's a list of books. There's always on Twitter, people are tweeting. And yeah. And Gabrielle, we hope you're listening.
We sure do.
Because we'll be looking forward to talking to you one day when we're done with the book.
I love it. I know I like people to hear from her because she's talking to more adoptees as she goes forward. It's kind of one of her causes now, which I love.
So, yep. If you're following along and you have the book, we're starting up next week with chapter 3. So follow along and send us your comments. I've noticed people, and I haven't quite figured out, that people have been commenting on Spotify, but there's no way to respond on Spotify. It's very strange. So if you're commenting on Spotify, please know that we're seeing them and we appreciate it. We just haven't figured out how to respond.
Yeah. And go to Facebook, to our Facebook page or Instagram, and comment there so other people, or Twitter.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we can
comment along. All right. Well, we have a great guest for our season.
Yes, exactly. All right.
Okay.
See you soon.
See you in a minute.